we're so comfortable in this country. It's just so warm and nothing going on. No threats. No one harvesting the forest. No one thrashing the ground, the leaves that we're all hiding under. And so we rub our little feet, thinking everything's copacetic and we have nothing more to do but enjoy what we've been gave. And I explained to you a long, long time ago, what you've been gave was a big trap. And we were supposed to maintain it if we could keep it, if you remember. And that was already a done deal way back when. You have a republic if you can keep it. You know, it's taken me a long time. I've been doing this research now in earnest, on a focus of a point, finding out where the heck America went, for 3 decades. You know, it's taken me, and I still don't even know if I appreciate what a republic is. I think I just now come on to it really better, and at least in a place where I can apply the definition, what the word really means in action. Again, not just talking about it, not just knowing about it, but actually trying to apply it. We had a republic if we can keep it. That's just a word. What does it really mean? And we were required at that time to keep it. I'll suggest to you, if you look at deep enough, it was never really given to us. That was a lie. In fact, the guy that said that was a lawyer, an attorney. And so, I've researched to the point where I believe we all been duped. The Constitution came in Article 6 and showed that this supposed nation was started as a debtor, and debtor not a master be. And so we can talk about everything about how much rights we got. We can even agree and believe we have civil rights and think those are cool, despite what we said for years behind the woodshed on what those that made those statutes say. And as recently here, mentioning those human rights, those monsters' rights, out of the UN, you see very quickly, if you just look at the UN's human rights definition, you'll see really in words what I'm saying about what happened in the Constitution. That we had a lot more work than just to have a republic and keep it. And in some regard, the part of the republic they did give us did work that we've essentially lost today. It's not lost. We've lost our hold on it. It's now being controlled away from us. It's being controlled against us. And at the same time saying it's being secured for us. Actually, they say it's being secured, and we think it's for us, and it's really secured from us. That we were required to step up and do something about it. That I've been talking that the facade that the Constitution appears to be, at least at Article 6. Well, what am I talking about? Do you know? I mean, when I say that, did it just go past your ears and through your ears and out into the nature? You understand what I'm talking about when I say about Article 6. That's also where everyone focuses on the law of the land. But it says in the beginning of that prior debt and engagements are law of the land as well. And that debt was never paid off. My research has not shown that debt was never paid off, which means the important part that we always tend to focus on to make it sound like it's really cool was really not in context of why it was being stated, that the supposed judges are duty-bound to recognize. That it's very clear when you see that. The way we come in the 90s then, people now researching this problem, they start to find out things aren't quite so cool. The raps are really coming off pretty quickly. That you start looking at people jumping over into the UCC, claiming that that's the new law. Well, it's not. It came out in 1963. They don't even understand it came from securities law. It has some bearing, but only in the places that it has bearing. And we had a whole divergent group of people running over there and making up a lot of stuff, trying to find their freedom, trying to find a way that this oppression that was from the beginning would not address them. But you notice that's all in UCC is in the sector of goods and services and obligations. So we are reflecting The UCC would reflect that debtor obligation. In other words, we get to the point of bankruptcy, and we find out, like when you see your capitalized a capitalized name on it, it looks like your name. It's all in caps. Everyone goes, "Oh, that's a corporation." Well, that's not really the full truth, and it's not necessarily provable except by another place, which is actual rules that the system, these attorneys, and who they work for, have situated and set up for us to see, if we were just going to see it, that the capitalized name is really a debtor in bankruptcy. That you start seeing this debt connection. And they theoretically says that there's not going to be any debtor's prison, yet you know today that's all set up, this soft law imposition of the UN and the international central order has been put on us to give us essentially debtor's prisons. And it's all in commerce. Well, that's debt. That's commerce, and politics is all the same subject matter at some point. And so they have us believing that we have rights. And I don't say these things there's been people that have made these phrases, and you'll know them better than I do. I don't really keep up with it. I'm not a good storyteller. I'm not a good joke teller. I don't remember these things. But it's been said that the best slave is one who doesn't know he is, or she. And the worst slave is the one that doesn't know that she is being treated like a he. And then in a gender neutral forum, which is the insanity that I can pick out real quickly here, that we don't understand to parse through, to understand how we identify what are we really living in. Now, there's only a few of us that tend to look at this, and those that listen to me probably more so. Those that turn me away probably a lot less so, and then the rest don't even think about it. But as I've been a little critical of this gentleman, he's been coming along, and he writes, John Whitehead, he writes exactly what I've been saying, and I don't just bring this up as that it's because I've been saying, it's confirmation of more people seeing it, that if we don't start to see this condition, we essentially do get what we've allowed. In other words, this is another concept in law called tacit procuration. By your silence, the other side presumes your agreement and consent. And we have the consent to give. That's the choice. So this is what we are working with. And well, before it leaves my mind, I'll thank you, JJ, for having Nemo on, and I was thrilled to hear that Nemo's much better using whatever it took to do it, and using in particular the oil unmentionable at this point, I guess. But my great joy to hear that he's gotten that taken care of for himself, and for you to have him together and to hear his voice, hear you talking about that. That's on UCY.tv. It happened right before the broadcast. I was tuned in just a bit, trying to half listen while I'm doing the broadcast, but fantastic to hear. Again, as I was talking last week about this marijuana, I don't have much, for me, I don't have much use as a plant herb or this, but I noticed that, again, we were duped and we were lied to, and we agreed to it as a society that this simple plant really had a lot to help a lot of people for lots of things. In fact, we can track back down why it was done, because you see, since real cures are destroyed by the government, and that the debt condition requires the government control business and commerce to create an engine of economy, they say. Remember, economy can be looked at, and I think we look at it wrong generally, but economy, the best economics for someone who is employing and wanting to become more economical would be to create slaves that work for literally rice, nothing, if that, so not even 20 cents an hour. And that's what they've gotten. When you hear about economy, you're looking at the index of how duped everybody is into working for nothing or less. And I say less because what are you paid? You're paid a promise to be paid in the form of as money. I say these terms very specifically. You'll find them when you read enough. As money. It's not money, it's as money. It functions as money, and you accept it and it's actually a promise. It's a promise to pay as this bill, this note. We've been through this before, that you haven't even noticed, and us, for these generations and generations, that we're given zero for our efforts. That's the most economic condition that can be run. You have lots going on and no money going out to do it. That we've all believed that there was a promise to be paid to us, and then you realize that there's also attendant obligation. So that's the system coming in to feed parasitically off your lives that has for many years, and certainly since I've been on air, I have not. I mean, I'm just talking stuff I learned maybe 2 decades ago. That's really kind of all I've been really speaking to, except if I put that knowledge, that awareness into the context of today's so-called news, what I call the notice, that it's coming now that more people are recognizing we live in an open-air prison, this prison without walls, as Whitehead comes on to say. As I've said, I've been a little critical of John Whitehead's writings, saying he's not quite there. Well, he's starting, he comes on, he's been writing, he says, we're all inmates in American police state. And he leads with something from Aldous Huxley and the Brave New World Revisited, quote, if it is perfectly possible for a man to be out of prison yet not free, to be under no physical constraint and yet be a psychological captive, compelled to think, feel, and act as the representatives of the national state or of some private interest within the nation wants him to think, feel, and act, to him the walls of his prison are invisible, and he believes himself to be free. That we've heard these quotes before, but to see it now in print, and again, Whitehead's an attorney, took him, I guess, a little bit longer to break down his training and to break through that problem, and I wonder really if he understands what his own membership is doing against him at some point. And lots of attorneys, the good, people that found that maybe what they're doing, what they intended to do, was not what the system they thought they were utilizing to do it was capable of. In other words, it is a deception, and they didn't quite see it, but they have a big investment in it once they go through that. For those of us that have seen this, it's not unusual. The problem is, as I've told you before, and I've talked from this perspective, in categories of potential and possibilities of the political structuring of what we are, whether or not we're actually sovereign as our own people, whether or not we are duped, whether or not we're debtors and subject to the bankruptcy, whether or not there's an occupation, whether or not there's an imposition, whether or not there's an invasion. You can go and look, and I can prove any one of these types of qualities of our existence out. But until you buy into something that shows that you are not actually in control, in other words, the question is who anywhere can just travel down a dang highway without having his papers or her papers? It kind of gives you the instant point. And I've been on air to try and explain to you how you approach that problem and what I feel I have found that will resolve against the imposition. Every week I bring something new about the old observation of how you do that. A lot of it's settled in this commerce connection. A lot of this, in other words, your prison industrial complex is just an offshoot of this condition of commerce and the bottom line. In other words, you see here all the time, there are lots of money funneled into this, and it's not money, it's this as money debt loading that they put on, and they put on your back also, that no one understands how to throw off. They also don't understand the jurisdiction's a fiction, and bankruptcy is a fiction as well. So we have a lot to think about as we move into this, and that's why I learned a long time ago, based on our general lack of knowledge and our absolutely certain inconsistency of consistent knowledge, I learned very deeply how not to judge other people for their failure to act on what I thought should be done with respect to what I could prove. To show me, at least, that we have so far to go as a people. However we are constituted. Again, as I talked last week, the revolution comes around. The revolution keeps coming around. It's not our revolution. It never has been. It never will be. The revolution is that rotation of history that comes back around to keep us subjected under whatever excuse, whatever charade. And also quickly listening, I guess, and I wish he would have cited the case, so I'd like to go read exactly how that worked out. But Nemo was saying something about a case coming down that allows the cops to lie. Well, that's not news. But to see that in print is interesting, and to analyze the reasoning behind it is not interesting. And you see now what true freedom of speech is. That people can even lie to you if they're in the government and get away with it now. How are you going to protect against that? And you can't. These things explain that you're a captive audience, that shouldn't be good enough for you under any any establishment, anything, whatever the word is. And this is why I tell you to try and understand how to separate yourself, remove yourself, become literally the outlaw. Out legal is what it is now. Become out legal, and then show that the system that they're trying to put on you required your consent in some official and formal form. In particular, those of you in the states that can readily see that the states are now functioning as the Model Business Corporation Act, that substituted the permanent laws of the people. That should have been a big clue what was going on here. And the entire condition is a prison industrial complex. This whole function is, I can see this. You can't expect that the keepers would have any constraint on them, as we learned through what I was explaining over and over and going through the Liber Code as a guidance of it. That was adopted internationally. Understand the power here of the universal acceptance of this by nation states. That I tell you, the nation-state governments are no different no matter where you go. Though, as I say this, I'm thinking of Putin, and looking at him as an interesting, to me it's interesting that he's now really the example of statesmanship, and the gamesmanship that goes on between these high political figures and the diplomatic characters just is pretty fun to watch. But this is, again, all agreed to by these level of players and essentially psychopaths, from what I can tell, because nobody on this earth is free, apparently. Well, you're free until you're not, and all of a sudden now you find out how unfree you are. But Whitehead now makes a discussion. I thought it was important. For those of you listening to his writings in this, there it is. He's come out and explained exactly what I've been talking about for quite a few years now, that I found out decades ago. And to show you how controlled the system is that you live in, what kind of a prison you live in, and who the wardens really are, and what's requirement between what you thought. Remember, you saw the human rights. European Court of Human Rights says you don't have the right of consent against the state. They can decide against your consent to kill you. Well, here's another one of those examples. Justices say it's enough to cite terrorism in declining a visa applicant. This is a really interesting problem, again, for us, but it's indicative, and it's not a problem to the point, it's a definition. That's a problem if you believed you were not living in a prison. And you thought that you can't even get into this prison if you're outside, if you're labeled a terrorist without any other reason. And this is speaking to the NDAA. The Supreme Court ruled Monday that the federal government does not owe a naturalized citizen a detailed explanation when it refuses to give her foreign husband an immigration visa. The majority of the court said it is enough for the government to declare the immigrant has been denied entry because of terrorism concerns and not list specific allegations that the spouse or applicant can contest. So here is that extrajudicial power showing itself, that the government, a bureaucrat in a department of government right now, does not have to have a reason. They just say a thing is a thing, and that is so. If you were considering that you had any rights to know. So to me, that they can lie to you, that there's going to be a case that decides whether these people can lie to you. We already know they can lie to us. They can get on the stand, and they can't be held under perjury for lying. If they're a cop or an official, it can't be done. Why? The Liber Code explains to us it's for the security of the wardens. In this case, for Liber Code, it's the military, which I suggest to you is another category of control. And what the glimpse of that was people doing research about flags and found out they got all wrapped up in this gold fringe. Well, that's true what that says, but the court doesn't get the court does not get its jurisdiction from the fringe of that flag. It might be notice of something, but it doesn't get its jurisdiction of that. So I've told you, focus on that jurisdiction. Forget the flag. But these things are indicative of other things that you take note of, like a court takes judicial notice of certain things. You have to as well. I've told you, you're a nation unto yourself. You have to do everything that you see that's been created in government, you have to do within yourself. You have all the capacities and more, actually, than what an established government is. And understanding the government of the United States was established in one of the jurisdictions of sovereignty, so it really never could be sovereign. It only was developed through a political jurisdiction. So you start putting these together and you start seeing the tail of the tape. You see the writing on the wall, and we are free to disregard it. We have the choice to disregard that. I have come to the point where I realized, for what I've been involved in, that even given if it was myself and by myself, I couldn't. I couldn't disregard it, and whatever that means, I'm just going to have to continue. And austerity came to my life because I don't enjoy all these benefits that they are willing to give you that are really debts to you that you've taken on, that the system has taken on as a promise to pay. To whom, I want to know? To whom, folks? What is this debt? To itself? Why don't we just do what Greece just did? And I think that's a joke as well. It's an odious debt, isn't it? And I told you about that. We talked about that happening, back in 2008? Why don't we just do this, end this, and start it over? Iceland did it. Iceland seems to be doing okay, except you've got to look very carefully. They're going to go down the same road eventually. But they've cleaned up their debt load pretty quickly. But see, when you found out, as I suggested to you, the reports were telling you this country, as I said last week and months ago, this country works on the bottom line, and the bottom line is killing people. The bottom line is imprisoning people. The bottom line is expending money to control people. And that's you. That's the bottom line of the country, called the United States of the government. You have to look at it that way. And if you don't, you're going to miss major parts that you need to understand in the underlying background of the battlefield you're finding yourself in that was declared. These people are so bold now, they're declaring everything. I told you when I anticipated this, the run, you heard me anticipate the run-up of this Pope promotion for climate change. You heard me say it months and months and months. I go, watch, it's coming. And boy, what they're unrolling right now. This is all part of that. So in the meantime, they also throw distractions, and we've learned about scripted conditions, and I don't know if you've heard. I'll just cut through this real quickly. Just an observation. Some kid called Dylan Root, apparently a middle name Storm Roof. Dylan Roof, and his middle name is Storm. So now we got the script name coming. But Dylan Roof went and shot a bunch of people in South Carolina, I think it was. And so there's nothing about this I can tell you that I'm interested in. It looks like it's a setup. We immediately, the people that are looking at all this, found out that SSRIs are involved, and that pretty much, and so you can expect the guns to be blamed, but we're not going to hit the underlying bottom line to the United States government, which is the psychiatric and pharmaceutical drug industries that works a lot, makes a lot of money, and works at, they don't care about killing you with 500,000 of you a year using these things. The psychiatry still got a license to do this. So this guy comes and kills 10 people in a church in I think it's South Carolina. Again, I didn't really look that close, but what I did look at was a response. What bothered me really is looking at the temperature, if you will, of people. Literally, at some point, it's really, I'm looking at what's the ignorance of people. What are they willing to respond to? That's really what I have to contend with, not what they won't respond to, but what they might, and what they're making out of this, and what is being made out of it. And I don't even know, when I say these people, these could be plants, but immediately it came out that this kid had been on psychiatric drugs, so I would say that needs to be really looked at, and it won't be, but apparently what was also brought out was this kid had a website, a Facebook or website he bought, and he had a so-called manifesto, and apparently in there he says that he wants to start a race war. Well, I'll tell you, the information I looked at real quickly, it looked like a script written to do exactly what it's doing here. There was nothing about the story claiming that he had put it up that I couldn't have seen was written. It was actually a bad script writer wrote this one, that you could see the dominoes being set up. That we then hear, because of his statement about starting a race war, and that now somebody else, and who it was. Oh, the Mad Jewess. Put together a bunch of videos of black men responding, and these are black men that purport to be the thinkers of black men, apparently, on YouTube, if there can be such a thing. But I was interested in one problem after I listened to each man make his case against starting, or against speaking against their own people, saying that they should start a race war, that they're coming back as thinkers of those people, of their people, the black people, and saying, listen, you thought this out, and their reason wasn't, this is my disappointment as well, their reason wasn't that warring, race war, or warring at all was not proper, period. Their ultimate reason, and I listened to 5 different videos, was that are you folks crazy? There's only 13% of us in the population, half of which are women at least, or more, most of us of which can't shoot and don't have the armament to go against the white race. That their reason for not going into war, race war, was because they were not prepared and under material, had no guns. That I was more disturbed by. These are the thinking black males now. That they are okay with a race war, in my mind, the way they say that, if they would be going to war right now, if they had the numbers and the guns and the experience with the guns and the tactical response, which bothers me greatly, because if we have this internal sentiment, and I'm just going to tell you, I just don't get out that much to have really paid attention. I don't come from this place. I never have. The people I've been around, I used to live in a suburban mixed multicultural neighborhood. That was before it was multicultures, before they started setting this up. I don't know that any of us ever had a problem. Ever. We didn't know about all this nonsense. We were just kind of moving along in our little utopia, what we were told, and everything was fine. And then all of a sudden now we have this point that people are willing, the thinking people supposedly are willing to enter into war if they were prepared to do so. That I'll tell you, as Americans, we have really fallen short. That if we think warring at all amongst ourselves is an answer, the shooting in Charleston is nothing compared to that sentiment in us as people. And how are we going to understand and work with each other and get anywhere? And how easily are we played by those that don't do this, that are sitting outside, that do the control the systems? How are we going to be able to reclaim what we ought to claim when we are fighting amongst ourselves like this? I was really disappointed to hear these guys say that don't go fight because we're not ready. Impliedly, we would fight if we were. And this is us, folks. This is Americans in America. And they're bringing up all kinds of excuses. This is, again, a bad script being written. That's why I don't think it was real. It doesn't mean that maybe people didn't die. That's all, could be part of it. Everything to me looks like a stage anymore. The problem is it stopped making sense. It's eliciting all the wrong responses, and it's being done by a driver outside of everybody, actually. And so these are the things I look into. Even as another excuse, it came up, and I've got some links for this if you haven't heard about it, but maybe not even the best ones, just some I put together. There's always excuses about symbology to condemn, as we have a multifaceted attack on lots of different ways of life or thoughts of life, to also eliminate argument, eliminate discussion. They want to call it dialogue. Forget that. They're attempting to eliminate your voice by bringing in symbols and referring them to other things, which is a non-definition emotional connection that people make. And what I'm speaking of now is immediately coming up. Now remember, the SSRI problem is not even hit at all as a possible cause, and we can find SSRIs involved in every shooting everywhere. I think every one of them that we see focus on the gun, but also in the South there's this other divide. I was telling you, as little as I know about it, as I did have a very profound experience moving a black family friend of ours into Louisiana to move back to his hometown. And that trip was a pretty interesting trip across the country, driving in a U-Haul truck at 52 miles an hour, because that's what the governor was set at, and you weren't going to go any faster than that. And I was enjoyed discussion with this man, having a whole other perspective of a reality that's in this country. There is a division in this country, but people have worked it out somewhat and pretty much. Although I was still shocked. I've told you this a little bit about this, that he still wanted to go to his hometown, which is also an international. It's a truism of men. They want to go. Men go back to their hometown to die, so to speak. They go down to retire and they die in the place they were born. That's not reflected so much. There's always a tie somehow, and I've seen this generally true, although it's becoming less and less as the years have been going on because of the way things are going on. But there's a sentiment in the South, and it's a deep-seated sentiment, but there's also a misunderstanding about it as well, that those symbols are used to further fracture, further destroy conditions. As I think it was Grumpy Elder told me, and he reminded me actually, because I did go see it. I just wasn't aware that there was this kind of a thing, that race war was promoted way since the 60s as an answer to stop race wars, which I quickly turned around and deemed an OXY-moronism, oxymoronism. This is a stupidity that is there, that's just what we see today out in climate change. Human causation, blame for natural events, the lack of understanding the system, the natural system sufficiently, or willfully disregarding parts of it in order to push a certain aspect which is really promoting something that you want to see done, regardless of how it harms other people. But the symbols in the South, one of which, the most important one for most people, is a Confederate flag, is at the heart of a growing political storm. Again, I think this is all fabricated. But this is what you see happening. This is why I think it's scripted. This is just as a script would be written along the lines of every other, I don't even want to call them false flags. This is just what's going on. We don't know what I think I see them. If I see it, I see it as a lie. It's not a false flag to me. As I asked you before, if you know it's a lie, is it a false flag? Well, I don't think so. This is just us identifying how these people are doing this to us. And it's up to us to choose to not involve ourselves and have the better answer, I guess, is the bottom line. But this is as trivial now as although it's important and it's a great symbol. That's the problem. It's a great symbol to defile what the actual meaning of it might be. That they're now, as trivial as using the flag came in immediately. Pressure is mounting on South Carolina to pull down the Confederate flag that continues to fly on grounds of the state capitol after a Republican legislator announced plans to introduce a bill to remove the divisive symbol that has inflamed feelings in the wake of the Charleston church shootings. See, this is a symbol, you folks. You need to understand what this symbol actually does, not from what you're told, but from what it actually means. And I have a little bit of understanding about this because the South represented independent production, and the North was parasiticism. But we can cut through the fact that the Civil War was about slavery. We already know all this. I'm not even going to talk about that. That was another lie that we were duped with. But there's another thing going on with this symbol of this flag, and that flag means a lot more than what's being imposed upon it by people to inflame the idea that this is racism, this is some cause you can get behind. Again, I'm asking you to recognize the tool that this has become. It had nothing to do, and the only reason why it came up is because this flag was on the car that was used by the kid to go to the church. And so that's as connected as that symbol is. We don't know what his interpretation of that flag is, and we don't know if it was the meaning of the use of the flag by the state of South Carolina. I'm sure it wasn't. And I'm sure when we look in deeper, we're going to find out that this is a scripted issue. You're going to have some people are going to come up with the truth, and you better listen very carefully. This kid probably was clueless, and even if he wasn't, being at the SSRI problem is not going to be investigated. You have, literally here, folks, you have the defense the defense of his temporary insanity here, if the SSRI truth would be to made out and be probable. That this is probably not going to go, but they brought in the flag now because it was just on the car. Well, I'd say, if you're going to go like that, let's roll. Let's roll with that. Kind of like giving monkeys rights. Let's roll with that. Why don't we just condemn the car, the type of car that the flag was attached to? And while we're at it, let's go and destroy the company that made that car. And then let's go find the state that gave that car company, the state that gave it aid and comfort. And let's go destroy that. Why stop at the flag, folks? I mean, if you're truly principled, why stop there? That, to me, that's why we can start finding very quickly. This is a set-up script we're being asked to be bought into. Going back to the black males responding, they're buying into it, and they're telling us that as Americans, they'd be willing, if they were capable and able, to shoot other Americans. That bothers me. I don't even need to worry about more. I just want that knowledge stopped. I don't care what color you are. I don't care. I didn't do anything to anybody. I've got, I think I was trying to figure out, I think 4 generations in this country. I'm as much here as I could be anywhere. More so, because I'm from here. I'm of the dust and the dirt of here. That I don't want no one around me thinking that warring is the thing that solves our problems. That this is being used to inflame a simple symbol. Again, there's a big deal behind this flag for the people that died for it. The people that in earnest were protecting their country in the South at the time the states were considered countries. Not like today, the adulteration we've allowed. See, here's the other implied problem. It's an example against our vigilance to keep the countries that we were gave, folks. That's what that flag also can symbolize. It depends on what you choose to constrain it to. There's a ton to be researching on this. Interestingly for me, let me just go to the reason. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is the document that will tell you a bit of the weaknesses in us that are being exploited by all of these events, and why these symbols are brought up, and why the tender hot subject matter like slavery is interjected. Remember that secession, the states seceding, was the main condition at the time that Lincoln decided he was going to eliminate, and he did. His forces won the day. That's why there's a secondary prison you live in and don't understand. That's the martial law that was created to expose that your military could be behind your civil authorities, and you won't know it. In fact, to divulge that by the civil authorities would be a penalty of death. When you read the Lieber Code, you see that all of these hot button issues are brought up around these, tells you, and so deftly used and so quickly, tells you this is to get us off the point. We got to stop looking at how they're wagging the dog here. You got to know that they're wagging the dog, and that ends it. So, and how they do it is through our weaknesses in the that we can find some of in the Protocols of Elders of Zion. If you read that not as an inflammatory device, a tool, but as a description of a problem, and someone knows you better than you know yourself. And I've told you the weakness for us in that. And if we don't humble ourselves to our weaknesses, we'll never know how we could be infiltrated. We'll never know how to watch for that or protect against it. We can't be vigilant against what we don't see or don't know. And this is, I guess, to tell you the problem of the problem about being given a republic if you can keep it. Did we really get a republic? What really was that? And how are we going to keep it if we were stupid standing on the steps? I've talked about all this before. I'm trying to tie this together with now the inflammation. We need an anti-inflammatory here, folks. We really do. Bring out the aspirin. Watch Tylenol, though. It's bad for our liver. That's That said, Tylenol and an aspirin was the only thing before I had my back operation that actually cut the pain out, because all the pharmaceuticals really didn't work. So everything in its place, and by its purpose, and for its purpose, and only to the limited scope. We have to determine that. Getting back into this Charleston issue, and I'm just saddened, that we're doing that. If that kid was under SSRIs, he was suffering temporary insanity. If that actually happened, we can't actually blame him at some point. Now, he did the trigger pulling, but I'm talking blame from intent and knowledge and application under knowing action. And I understand now, late breaking, that the people in the church at the time the shooting happened, if it did, are saying that they forgive him. And I can only imagine that they could see he was not himself. Them forgetting him is as if you would say there was the devil in him. And it wasn't him, it was something in him. If it's real. And if it's real, you see how fast that we hear Rahm Emanuel never waste a good opportunity, right? Even if it's real. This is why we don't know. This is how we don't know. They're taking advantage of us at every turn. I want us to know ourselves better, and I want us to respond, not act, but respond appropriately, and then respond to fix it so it stops at some point. This insanity stops. We have to remove the oxymoronism in us that causes us to be fractured, disassociated from ourselves without the SSRI. This is psychiatric. This is our societal dysfunction is like an SSRI in a way as well. That is a function of some entity, something knowing us better than ourselves and pushing our buttons the way we don't know they can be pushed, or that they can be pushed. That again, John Rappaport is right on it. I don't know exactly, but I thought I had read this article right before the Charleston story, and here's what it is. He was almost like it was like he was predicting this whole thing. The devious matrix called psychiatry. The war on free consciousness, pushing the individual into a blind alley, pushing society into a blind alley. Concealed facts exposed. This was written as he's dated it on the 15th. Someone maybe quickly can find out on their own. I don't know. I'm not looking at the chat rooms. It's just too distracting for me. But you can figure this out amongst yourself. And I have to go back and do this. June 15th is when he wrote this. I think the Charleston shooting happened just after that. But if I'm mistaken, that's okay. Interesting that it all came out the same. He's exposing again the falsehood of psychiatry itself. As we said, these people literally, by a Denmark scientist's study of the fact, are killers. The psychiatry profession kills 500,000 people at least. And that's the ones that die from the medication. That's not talking like things that we see from this Mr. Roof condition. Psychiatry does more than define mental disorders. It purports to describe actual states of mind, and it coalesces and freezes those descriptions in such a way that people believe these states of mind exist. That's you, folks. They say it, and you believe it. This is how insidious this whole condition is, underwritten by the government. It purports to describe actual states of mind, and it coalesces and freezes those descriptions in such a way that people believe these states of mind exist. They don't. They're fictions, fantasies. This is an enormous landscape of consciousness programming. It's actually reduction. Like many systems before it, psychiatry tries to reduce the possibilities of wide-ranging free consciousness. Throughout history, people have always been afraid of mind freedom. What will people with free minds do? What will society become if people's minds are free? I can tell you, society would change radically right down to its foundations. That was written by John Rappaport in his publication called The Underground. And he goes on to say a whole lot more that I don't have time to cover, that he has covered. And he says this, if not right before, right at the time of the shooting. that if these things together don't start to implicate the real focus we should be attending. And when we hear nonsense coming out of people, even those that would go to war if they were prepared, and say, listen, that's nonsense. I'm not here to war with you. Shouldn't be here to war with each other. I think the government's warring against us, and we better turn our face to that. Here's some of the proof. Let's go get them. That requires you step up, folks. That, again, John Rappaport, I've never met the man, never conversed with him, but he sure seems to be more right on, a whole lot more right on than he's ever been a little controversial. I mean, not controversial, but I mean a little sensational at some points. Not that a lot, but I mean, I seem to see a lot more out of other people. It doesn't seem to go away. Also, sensationalism could be, when properly used, a bit of a tool to grab your attention, but not as a headline action. So here he has right for you at the same time the psychiatry problem. This kid's underneath this whole point, this treatment. Again, the core, the underlying this is that the government allows this crime to continue. Remember, we talked about the cop who blew the face off the baby with a flashbang grenade and laughed about it, was ended up shot by him going to call one of his buddy cops killing his wife, who was also underneath some psychiatric drug care. And as I say it, because it's going to be so dangerous, I just ran across a friend whose wife had a problem, who was prescribed some drugs, and I heard in a conversation with the pharmacist to him that the combination of the drugs that was being prescribed together, if in too large a quantity, which he didn't say, would create a serotonin condition deficit. And I want you all to know, you have to look, and the reason that he was called to his attention, because the drugs he was giving for something that it wasn't, was for schizophrenia, and that's not what the problem was. But that two drugs together would cause another style of SSRI in their combination. That was off-label, but it's okay. It wasn't the FDA approved, but it's okay for these maniacs, these licensed killers, to prescribe and get and sell. That I want you to be aware of how this works. It's not even, I didn't actually understand this until I heard it, that two different drugs that are not used for the purpose can create a problem that will allow you to be the next Mr. Roof. And this is legal. So getting back to whether or not you have a choice of this, eventually, like with Obamacare and all this, and we heard the EU has declared that you don't have the right to consent to your own, to withhold consent to your own demise by their hand. Belgian doctors are euthanizing patients without their consent. Came out of cnsnews.com, which it's not funny, but I kind of chuckled a bit. They thought that you need consent. A study published this month in the Journal of Medical Ethics examined the deliberate euthanasia of patients in Belgium without their explicit voluntary consent as required by law. I'm going to stop right there. We just heard the EU 2 weeks ago that I reported here. EU Human Rights Court said you don't have that law can't be made. You don't have voluntary consent. And so this medical ethics is behind the times, isn't it? It's probably more propaganda piece. It wants to show there's this alarm. In fact, it's been decided. Confirmed again that before that case, governments were killing people, despite a supposed law that didn't allow them to do so. So what does the governments know that they can get out of even if they are challenged? That point brings me to the idea, that's why you have to know your battlefield, because you have to know that's the condition. That you might still fight it and complain, but when the decision comes out, it gives them license to do it. Like the recent case where one of the financial, AIG I think it was, one of the shareholders argued that the government came in and wrongly took some value by giving them money to continue. The court came back and said, well, it may be illegal what the government did, but if it wasn't but for that money, you would have zero value for bankruptcy credit matrix. So though you were right, the government was illegal, it doesn't mean anything to you in judgment. The government can do what it wants. Same thing here. But this is now moving it, and you think that euthanasia, your life, is not monetized. That should tell you something. Absolutely it is. Again, we talked about the bean counters and statistics and their danger. That your human rights aren't what you think they are. As I've been trying to tell people, your civil rights, all these people that would stand up and fight for their civil rights don't even understand what they're supposedly fighting for. Which is, if for those of you that haven't heard it, in paraphrase, you can find it at 42 U.S.C. section 1981, is the right, as the white citizens now, go read it, it's not me, I just read just from memory, but I'm just reciting what the law says, the rights as white citizens to pains, penalties, punishments, and fees and fines and taxes and exactions of every kind. You have the right, your civil rights is the right to punishment. If you didn't realize that, that's how backwards you're looking at this whole entire construct that we now have Mr. Whitehead saying himself is now an open-air prison, essentially. The prison without walls. As I've told you, you can have free speech. You think free speech is what delineates your freedom. I guarantee you can sit in a prison cell with walls, and you can scream your bloody brains out till you're literally blue and passed out, and you can do that 24 hours 7. They'll just give you a little room that's down the hall. Let you freely speak all you want. Your free speech is not free by you. It's just the way that you can expel the air through a vocal cord. That's free. And the rest of you might be somewhere else. So, this human rights, you should be very careful to start tying to the next thing that we've been talking about, and I didn't expect to spend so much time on it, but it's going to become so pivotal here. I don't think I was exaggerating to say that when the Russian Orthodox Church put their foundation down, the time immemorial principles, and said the Catholic Church was violating those. I told you that was a declaration of war, not by the Russian Orthodox, but in outing the Catholic Pope, the Vatican, in not constraining its activities to principled things based in time out of mind of man. That this, we heard about this encyclical. I've tied the Pope and the Vatican and this whole situation to UN and the sustainable development and the future Earth, and now we got the Earth Constitution, as I told you about. All this is connected. I'm telling you, this is a very important time to be paying attention to these things I've not talked too much in the past. Partly because for as much as you may appreciate what I bring, even some things still do sound kind of crazy. That I only want to bring it in context, so I don't scare off even the people that are so settled that what they're hearing is the truth. It gets kind of nuts. In fact, there's a guy who got put in a mental institution. If I'd have gone too much further, where I would be. So I anticipate things because I've looked at the battlefield, and there's ways to go about giving information. I'm not censoring myself. I'm just giving out information when it's more appropriate. In other words, it's not an unprovable thing, if you just look at it, that we are in the time when there is no holding back for these people, and the players are coming out. All the hands, all the bluffs are being. The poker faces are being dropped right now. Very powerful time to be watching the international stage. That right after the broadcast, I was talking about last week, the Pope and encyclical and all this, a draft is thrown out, and it was deemed to be a heinous act that this draft came out before it was supposed to be, we find out. It was a heinous act for this draft to be leaked 4 days before it was going to be leaked, to show you, tell me This is the notice that this was a stage play. This was to put, again, more promotion, give it more power, get people to look at it. I certainly looked at it. I only looked at a bit of it. I found out, as I said, I think I suggested this last week, it's the incongruent humanists manifesto. Human is the point. You don't talk in a biblical terms. You don't talk about humans. There's man or woman, and that was really much it. And yet they don't. They go to human. So human and human rights and UN. You need to keep control here. That this is, or keep track of the control here. That's consistent always and through this entire condition. That the 4 days later, this leak happens. It's a leak of the encyclical that's going to come out. So we get to see what this this plundering fraud is intending to support. I predicted the Vatican and the Pope. It's just any man that would be in that office as well. There's no particular man that we worry about in that office. It's the office, and whoever's in it's going to be there because, well, they're selected, aren't they? They're more honest about how they select the Pope, not so honest about how the President of the United States is selected as well. Notwithstanding. Pope Francis' climate encyclical leaked 4 days earlier by Italian magazine, deemed by somebody from the Vatican as being a heinous act. Folks, if leaking a document that was going to be rolled out 4 days later and is a heinous act, you need to be afraid. I don't mean by fear. I mean you need to be afraid as in be really suspicious about the intention and the capacity of these people to do you no good for no reason whatsoever. That this encyclical talks in humanist terms. I called it the incongruent humanist manifesto. At paragraph 2, it talks about being whole of the earth, being one with the earth. And then at paragraph 6 talks about sharing human coexistence, which I told you was another oxymoronism. It's just can't. You're either one with the earth and there's no coexistence, or else he's talking about something else by the time he gets already down to paragraph 6. And I'm not going to analyze this thing. I'm not going to be persuaded by what their excuse is for bringing on this and embracing and promotion, a stage promotion now, on the world stage of bringing on a fraud. That the stage show started with the blaming the leak as a as a heinous act. And then the explanations come out that the Pope lays the climate guilt at the feet of the rich. And you think yourself in America, well, I ain't rich, I'm barely making it. But he's talking about you, folks, as they talk as a nation states. They're talking about national industry that they condemn. They're not talking about you. But you are going to be subject to the taxation, the climate taxation that comes through this fraud. And we heard the divestment of national control into a central body. I've been talking about this since when I started broadcasting. But there's going to be a centralized control, and as you saw, the human rights of the UN, all your rights are subject to the needs of the state. If I didn't just talk about the Communist or Marx manifesto. Again, forget all these words. It's what's going on. What's the deed that's happening? That the guilt trip now comes by the Pope, promoting this whole agenda, which is causing. You're watching this TPP and TPIP and other things. Anyway, all of them, the five different parts. These are all part and parcel to the governance shift that's going on globally, that these people have been driving on for a long, long time. And so we have you can research a bit about the Club of Rome position. As we've seen, as I said before, the internal Vatican has been working on this. It's not something new. This encyclical is not just a new teaching. This is now the public teaching. They've been doing this. They've been working on this behind the scenes for decades. And the Club of Rome, as an entity, you can find a lot of what they were saying way back when. And so we're going to, at the hands of these thugs, we're going to be suffering the Club of Rome viewpoint. They're going to beat us with that Club of Rome viewpoint. And you will be the heretic. And you're being condemned right now. That my view, the Russian Orthodox Church, in anticipation of this, came out to understand the correlation and said, you have gone way beyond the immemorial principles. And then Putin shows up a few weeks later to receive this little trinket, as he's an angel of peace, so-called, and hands the Vatican, the Pope, an Orthodox encyclopedia. In my view, a very cool diplomatic move and a very big notice. You've lost your way, son. That this rollout is being seen by those who know as the promotion that it is to put a global order, and it's following a script that would, it rivals the best of the best on the world, certainly on the world stage, of any road show, any play that you might find. In fact, now let's just go ahead and do that. Let's look at the Vatican as a stage. And all the pomp and the ceremony and the costumes. And when I saw this come out with this encyclical, and then when they came out and they said, well, this is a heinous act, I said, this is a promotion for the play. This is the stage. And my very first thought was, this is Italian theater. What we're watching is Italian theater. It's serious as heck, but it's Italian theater. The neoclassical ideal demanded verisimilitude, which dealt with the strong appearance of truth. Speaking of Italian theater and drama, because of verisimilitude, fantasy and supernatural events were avoided in neoclassic plays. The chorus and soliloquies were also discouraged. Reality was stressed in drama, along with the plays that teach moral lessons. What is the encyclical but the lesson of so-called moral action? Well, we find that the moral action is really the action to take to advance a fraud. And you see the fantasy not being recognized, and it's looking like an appearance of the truth coming. The staging was a popular, the staging, the physical occurrence of placement on the stage. That's what the stage was. Think globally here, folks. The staging was popular by using perspective architecture and painting. These methods gave audience members the illusion of distance and depth. Scenery and stages were raked and angled to increase the illusion and create a perspective setting. Now put all these writings that you read as a stage in your mind and make it three-dimensional in your thoughts. The illusion of distance and depth. They're talking about your thoughts. As I'm applying what Italian theater was today. How it's changed, and we never really kind of noticed. This is a psyop, essentially. This is what the tools they learn how to do it. If you could do it out in front of you, I can do it in your mind. Every aspect of the drama was top of the line, from the scripts to the costumes. But the Vatican can afford this, folks. I mean, this is phenomenal as well. And now with the government of the United States, with gobzillions, they got no budget either. Some of the reasons improvisation was so well done was because actors would play the same characters their whole lives. The strong reputations of the companies brought in the huge audiences. Characters on a stage of the Vatican or a nation state or the UN that played those characters their whole lives, and the strong reputations of the companies, the UN, United States corporate, the Vatican corporate. Played right here, folks, in the definition of Italian theater. What flashed in my mind as soon as I saw them say this leak was a heinous act, and then, actually where I got it is when I found out that actually 4 days later it was going to be presented anyway. That was the way to get you interested. Oh, it was a heinous leak. Let's all run and go read it. Boy, these people are real clever. So just underpinning some of this theater, and one of the most important points is the second point here. The papacy was moved in Avignon, France in 1305. Well, I don't even know why they mentioned it, but this is in the discussion. The papacy is discussed in the influence of the Renaissance and in respect of the creation of Italian theater. I found that interesting. Another interesting fact, Constantinople, which is present-day Istanbul, Turkey, but you need to remember the distinction, all right? Istanbul was a different government that needs to be remade. Watch this. This is now touching back to Russian Orthodoxy. This is I think, if I got this right, the Muslim faith will be looking to Istanbul. No, I'm not talking about the promoted Islam. I'm talking about the one that's written. Is the Muslims are looking to a reinstitution of Istanbul. This is going through that Russian Orthodox influence and requirement. This is what I told you. There was a war declared here a few weeks ago between the two main with the Catholics, supposed religious churches. Moving on. The nobility, the important part here, the nobility patronized the arts. Playwrights were then often under noble patronage. So we have the nobility paying to have the scripts written. It's historic here, Italian theater. It's historic. This became how things were moved and moved on, and the purpose had a twofold purpose. When this theater starts, and the nobility makes payment. In other words, these people knew where their bread and butter was, how their bread was buttered. These playwrights, these script writers, they wanted a second job. They'd do a good job to advance what? The purpose of the now Italian theater's utility in conveying messages of the nobility. Moral precepts was the main purpose and reason. What was the encyclical? But a moral purpose, as stated. It's not, but that's what they're stating. They're trying to bring this into a moral concept. And you forget to ask, wait a minute, maybe you're immoral to begin with, and I don't need to, and besides the fact that you're talking lunacy, moronism, insanity. Moral precepts were what was used in this theater, in this staging. Justification for theater, partly in order to mollify those who still thought theater was immoral, such as the church. And wouldn't that be something that we've watched over and over? The government condemns something so that you go and watch it. And what the government condemns, you go watch, and they are paying the playwrights to give you the message that they told you shouldn't go see, that you go suck up like a sponge. And I want you to go read, again now, Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and see that's part of it. It's written right in there, this connection, this cause and effect, right here. The theater took on a very important societal function to teach as well. Not just an art form, perhaps Plato would have approved, but look at what government's done now. And when you have the world as a stage, the Vatican you look at is literally a stage with all their costume, their pomp and circumstances, the script. You look at 911, you look at the governments themselves, they're all just theater. Getting their moral purposes promoted. You start to understand why, I guess, for me, out of the blue, just reading a couple things, Italian theater popped up in my mind, and I just went back and read to you what has been historically referred to about it. That looks exactly like what's going on right now with the Pope promoting his agenda. Remember, the Green Pope, this has been a long time coming. Gorbachev, remember, he was promoting the green religion, and it moved into the United States over at the Presidio properties, and he was given quite a trust by the United States government. The Presidio trust properties, where they went around and beat down the property owners and the property in order to impose the green religion in those places as a trust property. So we were infected as a nation a long time ago. And the government, you see the government following through as well. Well, Gorbachev was what? The president or the minister of Russia at the time before the fall or at the fall. So So it's a global condition, folks. We're adulterated on a global level. At the same time, folks, the Vatican speaker and a California governor in a push for massive depopulation. I don't really like referring to the natural news. I found too much sensationalism, but where he does have a couple things right, I don't mind referring. This was confirming what I told you last week or a week before, that while the Vatican was talking about, no contraceptive, we want to have more believers, the goal of climate change is to depopulate the planet by 6 billion, we heard coming out of a Vatican mouthpiece when he referenced that 1 billion was adequate. That in the next week, we now see that the Vatican's pushing California over, shaking hands over all the way in California. Probably the fifth, at one time maybe, the fifth most economic place the best economy, fifth place economy in the world. Maybe not so much now that they're beating up, destroying agriculture, but that's neither here nor there as to the influence. Talk of planetary court and removal of 6 billion people under the Earth Constitution and world government. Mike Adams comes on to this, I think, a week and a half, 2 weeks after I've reported on it, but nonetheless has his own view about where. And that the governor of California is involved. If you hadn't figured that out, we are dealing with that a lot. In fact, we outed that as well when Governor Kitzhaber was found out, resigned, and then all of a sudden came to surface international green agenda compacts that went from British Columbia, Washington, Oregon to California. So Jerry Brown was involved if we didn't know it before. Catholic attacks, but they're pushback now, and I'm kind of glad to see this. We'll see. Apparently, it's not so solid though. That people are pushing back. Again, this is your consent. You can push back, but if you're still part of the organization, maybe not so much. But it's good to hear that even the faithful are not necessarily so trusting. And so again, without trust, you have really nothing. You have lack of trust, but I mean that's not something that's workable. You have to have trust, and you got to keep it. That's really the main creed, I would say. You keep your promises, keep your word. Do what do things and do them well enough without infringing on your promise. Don't make a promise to pay that's unending like we have the United States. Promise to pay at a particular time and get it done. Partly what you can't do with weight and measure or lawful money, not as money, but lawful money, silver and gold, as is defined for us if we were to go back and pick that up like we're supposed to. That would have been us remaining vigilant. And another report out financially, you really do have to get your money, folks. It's coming out. Even over, I think, in Britain, they said, you got to get your money out and stick it under the mattress and make it cash. But I don't know if I would say maybe if it's getting that bad, you should move it on over to silver coins if you don't have so much money. And those of you that have more, maybe put it into gold and then maybe stick it in a jar instead. But things are, the universal idea here is what we predicted would happen after the 2008. It's just taken this long that they are now rolling out this new system, this climate change financial construct, tax construct is the new. It'll be the SSRI, the SDI. Forgot. SDRs will be involved with this, even though we're having a BRICS condition. This is all part of the play that's going on. Catholics attack Pope over climate change fear-mongering. Catholics around the world are attacking Pope Francis for advocating a new global political authority to tackle the so-called man-made climate change. So they're confirming now what I reported was stated by the clergy of the Catholic religion, which is not a religion in my mind. It's just it's a business operation. It's a syndicated terrorist organization, as we can see now, because it undermines, at least for the United States, it undermines the way of life, the way of law, the Republican form. This climate change system does, sustainable development. Notwithstanding the federal government has adopted it, it's still contrary to the laws of the United States with respect to property, which is the main purpose that it was formed. In other words, commerce can be seen to have created or allowed the creation of property, and the way the property actually was conveyed makes it distinct and separate from the government and the government's ability to future control it. And you know that by just reading the documents of title for it all. It's really kind of that simple. So this climate change is an attack on the Republican form of government, notwithstanding the usurpers that have sit inside the offices of government right now, like we sued Kitzhoffer, just identical to this. It's just a fractal throughout the country and throughout the federal side. It's all the same look and having the same function. People are lawfully in offices but doing unlawful things. That you need to see that, and you could stop it. You could be one that steps up, like we did, and just make another example. They're everywhere. We're finding them everywhere. That I told you that I don't think the Pope has any allegiance to the United States, so he can't be found in treason. But he certainly can be found to be a felon when he steps on our soil to go to the UN, because he's imposing climate change, which is the antithesis of the Republican form of representative government. But the Catholics, summer Catholics, are coming out. They're writing about this. You can read a little bit about it. One of the things was I'll give. But here's the problem right here. Is what I wanted to highlight. Despite the Catholic attack, so-called, they call it attack, against this position, maybe not so strongly. And this is what bothered me a bit. I'll give Pope Francis the benefit of the doubt of his intention, but he is making a huge mistake, and it is embarrassing and discouraging for hundreds of millions of Catholics. And so here he's giving someone, a felon, the benefit of the doubt. This just shows me someone who doesn't understand this condition. They bought into the lie that climate change is something of a, well, as defined, human-caused. Human-caused. So how can you look at this encyclical? If he says you're defiling your own nest, we have to stop that. Well, okay, but the keepers, if you're in a pig pen, the keeper causes that. And he talks about we seem to do this. Well, I want him to define we as him and stop bringing me into the conversation, because I don't do that. And so this is what we have to start parsing apart as we hear people being all-inclusive, talking in generalities. We have to get very specific. Well, I've gotten language specific. When we do law things, we do language-specific things. And I've told you, when you stay inside conveyance law, land law, soil disposal law, the language is different. And as long as you confine your language to that, there's nothing these usurpers can do, actually, except when I say nothing, I'm talking lawfully. There's always the criminal. There's people as on the world stage in the costume that they wear as prominent as someone called the Pope, that will teach what they will promote as moral, and it's an absolute theft on people, and a theft and plunder on those that are productive. And contrary to a Republican form of government that is supposed to be in place to recognize your pursuit of your property and the acquisition, the furtherance, and the enjoyment beyond that. And then from that, hopefully your charity back to the society that allowed that. They're working to subvert all of that. And we can either be the crickets, or we need to stand up and make that decision and not be cowed because someone has an identity problem that they believe in. And then all of a sudden now you're the bully for questioning it. You heretic. How dare you? But see, feelings of someone's identity is not necessarily who they is, what they're about, and what the reality is. Because these people do not actually represent reality. They try to do things in the theater that mimics a reality. As I said, it was immediate thought. Italian theater, this whole thing, you're watching it, and particularly it was fun that it was focused on the Vatican because it comes out of Italy. These people haven't gone anywhere. They've always been doing this, and they will do this. Why? Because you haven't learned your weaknesses, you haven't learned your frailties, and you haven't learned that there's people out in the world that will take advantage of you. Just as we heard Rahm Emanuel. Don't waste a good opportunity. Why not? And why not for an opportunist? Another discussion, how climate change doubters lost a papal fight, which was interesting to say. Those of you that may try may be thwarted when you come up against the system. This is reported. Pope Francis was about to take a major step backing the science behind human-driven global warming, and Philippe de Larminat was determined to change his mind. A French doubter who authored a book arguing that solar activity, folks, of all things, not greenhouse gases, was driving global warming. De Larminat, L-A-R-M-A-N-A-T, for those of you that can speak French, sought a spot at a climate summit in April sponsored by the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Sciences. And that's the academy that I read 2 papers that were supporting climate change way back when. Nobel laureates would be there, so would UN Security General Ban, if you don't lose the war, General Ban Ki-moon, U.S. economist Jeffrey Sachs, and others calling for dramatic steps to curb carbon emissions. Here we are, the tax implications here, the tax plunder, the system that's put on you, the bureaucratic system that's put on you, the smartness of things that comes in the Internet of Things that comes to control what you do and how you do it. After securing a high-level meeting at the Vatican, he was told that, space permitting, he could join. He bought a plane ticket from Paris to Rome, but 5 days before the April 28th summit, de Larminat said he received an email saying there was no space. It came after other scientists, as well as the powerful Vatican bureaucrat in charge of the academy, insisted he had no business being there. They did not want to hear an off note, de Larminat said. So, he tried, folks, and he was denied. They do not want a contrary view. So those of you that will be a contrary view, understand you may be thwarted. Don't let that stop. Apparently, de Larminat has a story here that you can now see that these people mean, they actually intend to hurt you. And they come in the costume of pious people, the pious plunderers, organized criminals. Now, he brought up the sun. You know, I've been bringing up the sun forever. I had Dr. Arthur Robinson, a chemist, scientist, literal scientist, on the show a long time ago, Revolution Broadcasting. We talked about all that. I had a little bit of oceanography background, so I knew a lot about how, not a lot, but I knew that carbon dioxide is the main sink for carbon dioxide in the world is the oceans. Water readily absorbs carbon dioxide, and it sequesters it right there, and that gets used in different ways. It's a big chemistry factory. But so, we've covered all that. But what, at the time we didn't cover, but we mentioned it, but I mean, it just seemed kind of ludicrous. Why isn't the sun regarded where the church is concerned? Remember, the encyclical says that climate change is something, that natural greenhouse gases are the problem. Carbon is the problem. Funny that carbon's less of a, we now find out it's a mitigating gas for temperature, actually a thermal mitigator. And that methane is probably way worse. But the worst of all is water. I'd like to see them get rid of all the water to stop climate change, folks. They might just get rid of all the water. That'd stop it, wouldn't it? That's how insane this becomes. But when I saw the statement that this de Larminat wanted to say, hey, Pope, there's a sun out there. You've heard me say the very same thing. Hey, another thought triggered in my mind. Where has the Vatican been wrong here about the sun? And might it not be wrong again? And are we willing to wait for hundreds of years until it was in roughly 1992 when the Pope told the Vatican scientists that Galileo was right? Are we going to wait hundreds of years from today to find out that this Pope ought to have known there was a sun that caused the problem, that the sun is actually the central character in this play, the natural play? That I just thought, maybe we have a problem here, Popey. maybe you've made the same mistake you did when you faced Galileo. Now, I'm asking you to consider that because maybe that's what has to be brought before this Pope. Maybe he's really has strayed and he hasn't looked up very much. Maybe he's buried his nose in his encyclical so much he forgot that the Catholic Church was already wrong once about the sun. And as I told you that when they had ClimateGate and all this nonsense, that the climate wars have damaged science. I told you that science now, the whole of science, almost everywhere, and now include beyond climate, but to our foods and our monopolies for pharma and bio and all this and the poison companies, all this bottom line stuff, all these corporate things, that all this science, this purported science, the government agencies using false call it science. I choke using the word false science, pseudoscience to promote their agenda. Best science. I should just call it best science. It's not science at all. It's fraud to promote all of this agenda. That I told you that when all this was coming down, that science now was prostrate before the truth. It could not face the truth ever. We've lost the trust in science, and that's not our burden to bear at this point either. We just have to recognize there isn't actually a proof that now someone else has noticed it. The climate war's damage to science. I thought it was an important review. It goes through quite a bit of things of how now this is used. The cheerleaders for alarm. Again, not scientists. Rah-rah for the climate extremist alarmists that will disregard the sun. Scandal after scandal. We have to make a short list of these things. When you go talk to people about it, again, you're going to run across a lot of people that are conducive to this. That's why they're in their places. All these people I've been telling you about have gotten their places in the seats of decision lawfully. They're using them for illicit ends. You have to be able to produce the proof on the record and call their attention to it, at least firstly, and then call them the felons they are when they disregard it after that. That this article goes through and just delineates in some fashion what we are harmed in. They say harm to science. We are harmed by this harm to science. Notwithstanding, it's really only been scienceology. Science is really the study of what we think we know. And this science, this so-called IPCC science-related stuff, it's not even based in a science hypothesis. It hasn't any basis. And so we tend to look past, we get into these charts and everything. Those charts mean nothing. Even if you had an increase in temperature, those charts mean nothing with respect to the idea that climate change is man-caused, because that idea has never been proven to be proper to be putting the numbers to it. How far we've gone to allowing this nonsense. So, I ask again, the Catholic Church was wrong about the sun in Galileo's time. The Catholic Church has been incorrect on quite a bit of science. I mean, listen, science has been wrong about science, because science is, again, scienceology. It's the study of what we think we know. Maybe we didn't see it all. Maybe our few little senses that we have, and one of which, our intuitive sense, is completely disregarded by science, which I've talked about before. That maybe we're getting it wrong all the time. That to create a moral teaching on this, when it's a facial fraud, has to tell you how heinous the figure of the Pope is, how evil it is, and how evil the syndicate of people that have rallied up around it to not call it out for the clothes the emperor's not wearing. Hey, Pope, you're without a robe. You forgot to put your costume on coming stage left, Pope. Hey, gotta go back and get it. You have no basis. There is a sun. Ask Galileo. See, folks, we just have to come up with the reality of it. And we really don't have to get long-winded about it either, although I kind of do that behind the woodshed, even though I'm trying to cut through this. It's important to get back to reality and show these people are insane, literally insane. And don't be persuaded by who doesn't get on whose side. That's just creating that division. As another report, Jeb Bush joins Republican backlash against Pope on climate change. Well, folks, if there was a backlash on climate change, then the Republicans, while they were in control of the government of the United States, would have destroyed all sustainable development connections in the government. They would have outlawed the entirety of it. And they haven't. So be careful of getting on sides here. As soon as you get on a side of the climate change, of the carbon thing, you agree it exists. It's a fraud, folks. It doesn't exist to the extent of legitimacy. It's a crime. Don't buy into either side. And this goes for every issue of division. Like I said, and I don't mean that it may be, I guess it is consistent. I'm disappointed that black men looking at the supposed white boys called a race war, that they would actually go and become a warring race, instead of saying, hey, that's not the answer for us. Just generally. That they buy in. They buy in the response. We can't buy into the response. No public buy-in, folks. As soon as you have public buy-in, they win. Interestingly, in the stage play and the give and take and the tug of war and the OXY means acute hyphen moronism, oxymoronism, acute moronism that plagues us. You'll see, like in the publications, the scandal of Britain's fuel poverty deaths. Thousands of people die each winter in the UK as a result of being unable to heat their homes. Are we doing enough to help them? I would have to say, just from general context, this is a liberal publication. But folks, think about what they just said. Yeah, maybe there's people dying. Maybe there is something we need to be doing. But they're dying because it's getting too cold. Something that hasn't happened before. 31,000 extra winter deaths in England and Wales. That doesn't sound like global warming to me, folks. So here in this liberal bleeding heart condition, and I think we need to care for our people, but it's the reasons, it's the denials that go on. They say that 31,000 extra people died this winter, and we're supposed to be getting warmer every second. And I've told you, listen, it balances out. We're going to have extremes right now, and the sun's a big part of that. It's kind of in an odd phase. We're not much different than the Renaissance time, actually. It's funny how this all comes around, doesn't it? I just thought about that. I forgot to say that. We're kind of around at the Renaissance time, the global, the Maunder minimum and all that in science. The recognition of science looking and say, hey, we got a unique condition. There's no sunspots, and we're having the coldest times on our planet. The Thames froze over. You see all the pictures. 31,000 extra deaths. And they will be the same rag that will say we got global warming. Promote the fear mongering that the Vatican's now buying into. Flashback, folks. ABC's 2008 prediction: New York City would be underwater for climate change. New York City underwater. Gas over $9 a gallon. A carton of milk was almost $13. Welcome to June 12th, 2015, or at least the way that was the wildly inaccurate version of 2015 predicted by ABC News exactly 7 years ago. We're down to 7 years and forget, folks. How screwed up are we? But this is the promotion. Now, let me go back to the promotion. Despite the facts, you have Jeb Bush and Republicans not buying into climate change, but they're not denouncing it either. This rag, what I would consider a liberal rag, rightfully complaining about 31 extra deaths, but denying that winter is not warmer in global warming condition, that they were the ones that wrote in a negative context of the story of Jeb Bush and the oil companies, saying that the climate encyclical was actually, if you wanted to help the poor and the cold, you need to embrace fossil fuels. But this same rag came out to denounce that, even though they're complaining that people are freezing to death in the winter. The insanity that develops, this oxy meaning acute, moronism that we suffer, that is up to us to stop. The acute moronism that comes in the form of what you know, Agenda 21, which is sustainable development, which is climate change, which is the fiscal, this Obama scare, health security, housing security, security this, security that, now national security. It's all part of this. That I said that this is all about your property rights. This country, United States of America, let me recite it again, let me think here. Hernando de Soto, The Mystery of Capital, I think it was written in 1985. He explained to me, a Geneva economist, trained economist out of Peru, explained to me, a globalist, explained to me what his study of how the West, the United States of America, had made it where no one else in the world, even the West parts, the westerner parts of the East, tried, was that the United States was successful beyond all that, and even beyond its own corruption, because it had a system of records that recognized property, that a system of records universally that kept it straight, and a system of laws that protected that property. Was the only distinction in the world why the United States is the place it had been at that time. That Agenda 21 and climate change and all this international imposition is antithetical. This way of life, this establishment, and that being the Republican form of representative government. In other words, when you see in the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, the states constituted to protect these things, life and pursuits of property and liberty, that they're protecting. That's a basic and fundamental definition for the Republican form that you don't get in a democracy, that you don't get in a moronism, that you don't get in sustainable development, that you don't get in socialism, that you don't get in any other capacity except where you have laws that provide for property and a system of records that explains that has evidence for it, and a judicial system that protects those property rights based on that evidence is why we are different. That I told you they kind of destroyed a bit, that I have been focused on trying to restore a bit of, in my little way, that we always get this Agenda 21 imposition. People speak through Agenda 21. This is an old story. It actually kind of folds in. I think I can pull this off, although I don't have the document in front of me. I'm going to speak a little bit to it because I need to get through a lot of these stories. There's so much on the board here that I don't get to. That it's a little bit, again, frustrating to all this evidence of what's out there and actually evidence of what we can do about it and how to interpret. That it kind of frustrates me a little bit not to be able to get to all of it. And I attempt to try and go through the highlight of it and try to get to the most core of it, which is kind of fast for a lot of people. But anyway, this underpinning of this underpinning Agenda 21, sustainable development, climate change, climate taxation, this encyclical, this moral teaching, so-called, to advance a fraud upon the whole of the world, folks, to steal from those that can and from those that have created systems in their establishment to protect themselves, to cause that plunder on that whole system to give to those that couldn't or didn't want to. That's another thing, folks. We did this in the United States of America. Despite all our corruption, all that happened. They want to steal that from us. They don't even want to give that to someone else to do for themselves. Or they don't want to leave other people alone that didn't choose that when we had that example. In other words, we were born into that example. Those people still didn't choose for them that they want to destroy all that in those people. Their own choice to not. That this Agenda 21 as a concept becomes very important. It's been what people reflect on that have come late to this knowledge. And so I give that enough. It's not wrong. It's just not as comprehensive. For me, it's a bigger story here, bigger picture, more comprehensive, and you'll see the battlefield is global that way. And you'll understand that there's a different way to speak about this when you see how huge this actually is, and then how simple it is to destroy. And that distinction was told to me by Hernando de Soto, that we have to restore our reflection, our respect to ourselves in property, creating records that are evidence to all the world that a court system does only support, not make fiat decisions in judicial decisions that came up. Property rights are under attack coming in Oregon. Agenda 121 coming soon. This was the story back of the Sugar Pine Mine. And it was a response to Agenda 20. They were thinking they were applying Agenda 21 is voluntary, non-binding UN action plan, which is allegedly focused solely on sustainable development. Well, it's not focused on it. That sustainable development is what it is. Agenda 21 is the plan part of the implementation of all that. Adopted in 178 countries in 1992. Adopted, folks, very important. Adopted, not enacted. In 1992, the plan is based upon a program to abolish property and protect fragile environments. So there's your connection to climate change. The part of climate change is protecting of the fragile environment. Now your life is now conjoined to the environment. Now that tells you that the encyclical is incongruent, because you are one with the earth. You will be acting, no matter what you do, you cannot act separate from the earth. But that's what they've established to divide your mind and understand, try to put them in a seat of power that you may not quite get, that they are certainly in control. But now to protect the fragile environment by properly managing cities. Some charge the program wants to push all citizens into cities. America is a signatory country to the Agenda 21. What I'll tell you is they want to push everybody to cities, but what they've done is made city-states in the urban areas. It's a false duality. Urban and rural. Rural is a derogatory term. It actually should be the countryside. They've created a false existence in the United States of America that there's only two places, urban and rural. The rural will support only the urban, which everybody is put in, and the rural will be subject to the central academic control in the cities. Think of the city of Vatican City. This is a miniature in America already set up. The programs and university systems and solutions networks already set up to impose this. Now, this was in relation to someone looking at this biodiversity program of the United Nations. That's also a factor. And applied through the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, making national headlines. It sparked a massive controversy last year when the battle of the Bundy Ranch played out over our televisions. The Cliven Bundy incident was just one of a multitude of heavy-handed BLM actions which caused revolt among the property owners and concerned citizens in 2014. This moves it over the conflict now into the Sugar Pine Mine issue. The Sugar Pine Mine was the miners that were besieged through what I can consider a felony conversion use of the local sheriff to advance an internal administrative rule that didn't actually apply to the miners of which, like most of us, didn't actually understand what they were up against, didn't make a proper record. I'm on record about that. That I wanted to touch base on this, how they get this agenda to work, how they make decisions that appear to be lawful, appear to be within an authority, get you to stand down. You think you're getting due process, and it's nothing of the sort going on. I don't have the time, and I won't be doing an analysis by the paperwork. I don't have it before me. But a stay was issued in favor of the miners in this issue, where someone perceives this to be the encroachment of Agenda 21. This, in fact, is the encroachment of the failure of the government to honor its fiduciary duties to property owners. It's also, we can see the methodology that advances sustainable development, and they've eliminated due process for administrative expediencies back on the backs of ignorant people. Not that we're not talking stupid people, we're just ignorant of things. That they stay keeping the BLM from purportedly invading the miner's property there, which the miner had every right and did call the Oath Keepers to protect, and they think that they're doing some constitutional protection here for the Fifth Amendment and the Fourth Amendment. I can tell you nothing of the sort's happening because the administrative process is the fulfillment of that condition, which they had really nothing. What you saw when you were watching the BLM just being thugs, the due process of which was never going to be given to the miners, that they've created this pseudo truce, I'll say. The stay issues against the BLM, and the read of that stay by the ALJ, the Administrative Law Judge for the IBLA, Internal Board of Land Review or something for the Secretary. I don't remember. I can't remember these mnemonics. Anyway, they're the court for the Secretary of Interior. The decision that was made, I've never seen such a long-winded decision to stay some kind of action, that they go through and they explain some things, which I was fascinated to read. Let me suggest to you that I've never seen one of these like this. Normally they just stay it and then that's it. They actually had to explain it. But remember when I talked to you, I said that this issue that the miners did not preserve was upon a non-compliance. And again, listen very carefully on how Agenda 21 is implemented, how the Biodiversity Treaty is implemented, how they get you outside of your rights, and how you concede and consent over to the authority without coming right up and saying you don't have one, as I suggested needed to be on the record. That I told you that this was on a non-compliance of two rules. Two rules that I proved for the record, so that I could show how the IBLA was going to destroy these miners, how the Secretary was going to impose this agenda, really the sustainable development part, the biodiversity treaty part of this, of non-use of the land, and they were going to make an example of the oldest mine in Oregon. In other words, if you're the oldest mine and couldn't prevail, none of the rest of you can. It's all going to be a lie. I've explained exactly how that's going to come down. But the state comes in, and it's very interesting. And they do this agenda, this biodiversity issue, this sustainable development, very slickly. And I think if you hear what to listen for, and you understand a little bit of your subject matter, again, the battlefield, you can easily defend yourself against this. It doesn't have to get here. That I told you that when the miner did not address the rule, instead argued some traverse point, some other point, like I have pre-1955 rights, that they did not address administratively that rule, that the IBLA would come back and rule on that rule being implemented and not answered by the BLM, that the stay speaks exactly to those two rules. So, to point out for you all, and I don't have that in front of me, that this is exactly the way this is going down, the way I predicted it would. It has, and every time I've read them, I've seen them, I've watched it. This is not unpredictable, that it's gone the way I suggested, that the miners had to respond to the non-compliance of a rule. And I told you, in explanation, those rules are not applicable. And they can be stated that way in 2 paragraphs. And then I found I read to you a third when we get into the National Environmental Protection Act that is purportedly a part of this, that I told you the miners and property owners, especially conveyed property, all y'all that are on property, not like a mining claim's a funny thing. It's only half conveyed, but the other half is held in trust. For all y'all in land that's been conveyed, you have a patent or a state patent that underwrites what your rights are. And normally there's no reservation to state authority, including taxation authority, why the patent is the ultimate form of evidence of what you own and what the government can and cannot do. That this rule imposition was not applicable, that this stay speaks to these conditions as far as the rule, but says 2 very important things which told me, and nobody has discussed it, that I wanted to point out to you, that is stated right in these discussions and these decisions, that right off the bat it says that the BLM failed to identify whether or not the miner was required to file a plan of operations or notice of intent. The problem is the stay decision goes on past that statement. Now let me just inquire quickly, without getting too deep, where it's shown an administrative failure has been done, a procedural failure on the agency has been done. Don't you think that's the fact of a due process violation sufficient to return the case and the matter back to qualify that point? Because here's the point. If they are not required, and I've told you how they're not required to file a plan of operations or an NOI because they're not a major federal action under NEPA, which is what a plan of operations or an NOI, notice of intent, is about. Those are actually done by the agencies, not the contractors. The miners are not a contractor. That wouldn't if there was not a showing that the plan of operations was required, and their whole problem, or the BLM's whole problem, was that there was none filed, wouldn't that kind of tell you we have a due process problem that is not solved by continuing the action any further, that continuing the discussion by the ALJ in the decision is actually continuing an administrative violation of due process to go on and discuss any further, that I found very interesting that they actually said it that way and then moved on. That they really don't talk about the miners' pre-55 rights, which I told you was a misinterpretation on the miners' part of their rights, applying a wrong law to those rights that they claim, that a prior decision of which stated that those miners do not have pre-55 rights, and I explained why. Because those pre-55 rights are pertinent to the 1947 Act, not the Act of 1872, where the miners have grant right of entry and use and enjoyment exclusively against the whole world, even the BLM. That the stay decision moves on and discusses certain things. To me, it's blah blah blah. It's just they're trying to support this condition. And then they say another very interesting thing, that at the end they're showing that they don't speak of these pre-55 rights, but they do say that the BLM failed to fulfill the requirements of Section 5 of the 1955 Act. So they never really mention where these rules come from. They never mention NEPA. They don't mention the underlying authority, but they say that the BLM failed to comply with Section 5 of the and impliedly it's the 1955 Act. So I go, like anybody would, you go read the 1955 Act at Section 5, which is not applicable to an 1872 entryman. But the 1955 section states there's due process required by the BLM to find out whether or not the entryman is actually doing mineral incident work. That his entry is provided for under law. It's a whole bunch of due process notices and communications that have to go in Section 5. Let me stop there for the moment. Now, don't you think, again, where the court identifies a failure of due process on an agency to fulfill its mandate to qualify the law, don't you think that due process failure is sufficient to stop the process there and return the case and the matter back to the agency to fulfill what it needs before you impose upon a property owner? I'm going to tell you without equivocation, yes, they should have returned it right there. That's the second due process violation that the ALJ, administrative law judge, does against these miners in favor of the agency. Another very interesting thing is stated, as I'm trying to remember these things in my mind. They also said that the ALJ advised the BLM to prove a thing. It had to prove that it had complied. That little sentence right there alone is another violation, isn't it? How, as the ALJ, as the Court of Appeals, is a review of a lower court, how, where the court admits that it did not find where the BLM had proof to show that it's conformed with Section 5 or proving the obligation of the miner to make a plan of operations or notice of intent. That statement implies that there's no record of any compliance. How is the ALJ then given authority to allow and advise the BLM to produce a thing after the fact that it hasn't produced, and how is it going to produce that into the record on appeal? That this thing continues to be on appeal. So right in the stay decision, just in a nutshell here, 3 violations of due process. As I told you, the miners are not going to enjoy due process. I don't know what the outcome's going to be, and I don't know what political decision they're going to make, because they're not making a law decision here, not even administratively. Whether or not I'm on record enough and got sent in places, and the Jefferson Mining District is doing some stuff behind the scenes completely independent of all this, whether or not we give them the information that they decide to make the right political answer here to cover up the problem, I don't know. I can tell you I see 3 violations of due process at the appellate level that nobody responds to, not even the oath keepers. Nobody recognizes the violations because we don't know, we're ignorant. That they also cover up this ability to control the miner continuing as well, and the non-use of that land for the purposes it was the entry was granted is another crime. That is how they're taking us down. And I told you the very first answer was to tell them that the law didn't apply. What did Section 5 do but to inquire upon even if Section 5 was available or applicable to a 1872 entry, Section 5 says, inquires, it's the agency inquiry, what are you doing on the land? The answer of which, even if it was applicable to an 1872 entry, is, I am in here as a granted entry, the rights and enjoyment of which are exclusive to me against you. That the agency didn't do. The record they keep would have told them that, but we find another implied violation of record, where they violation of law by the agency of the BLM not keeping accurate records. They file a mining claim underneath and under the provisions after 1976. That's the FLTMA, the Public Land Management. They don't accurately reflect the record of 1872, so they slide underneath a second servitude that the miners are essentially oblivious to or not responding to. Because I'm on record about all this for years now. These people were part of our Jefferson Mining District, decided that they wanted to destroy Jefferson Mining District. We didn't let that happen. They formed their own district, and this is the offshoot of their endeavors. Don't listen to simple reason that Section 5, something I've never seen the IBLA rule. This is something very unique. Not one party that I've seen go to the IBLA has ever been told by the IBLA that the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, was required to give them an opportunity to declare what their entry was and whether or not there was administrative servitude. This is the very first time, and they still screwed it up. And so I went through this for miners in particular, but those of you that listen in, and I know maybe it's kind of foreign, that these administrative hearings are really lawless. You have to be able to handle that. They're lawless across the board. It's like every government agency that you're dealing with is lawless. That you have to learn how, you have to get involved and roll up your sleeves enough to understand how to protect yourself so that you also protect others, so you keep your way of life. Because if you remain crickets, if you don't do this, you see the IBLA, even where the miners think they have a knowledge, how deftly they get around to continue the harm and violation. That you have to be able to be aware enough to stop it in your problem. Not just the mining problem, but you see now, as I'm explaining, how they violate you, even under this supposed authority, the costume of authority. That IBLA judge committed a felony, at least, or 3 felonies. And he committed 3 more for omitting to actually say the right law. That we have sent to Jefferson Mining to send a show cause how the BLM's actions, how the Secretary of Interior's actions aren't those felonies, and in fact making war on the United States treason. That you can too, folks. Thank you for tuning in today. Really do appreciate it. I hope, despite the small listenership, that you're getting some tools and that you do work them. Do it where you can. And thank you for any support that you've been sending, though I don't see any of it. I hope you are supporting reallibertymedia.com and donate, PayPal, or whatever support you want to give. UCY.TV, the broadcasters, folks, terrestrial broadcasters are out there. Thank you very much. And worldtruth.org, the social network. I still haven't found out what happened last week on the encoders, on the servers. But they're back up, and they provide the servers free to all of us, and commercial free as well. You didn't hear a commercial, and so support those of us and the systems behind those of us, and the people behind those of us that bring the voice. I don't know where else you're going to hear this kind of information. And again, you have a contribution, markonthebeasthour.com. If you've got something you want to have me talk about specifically, please send me that message. Y'all take care. Watch the heat. Happy Father's Day to all those that do, and appreciate that you are still hanging in there, and we don't have to be crickets, folks.